Well, it's not exactly Richard the Lionhearted and King Philip and King Frederick heading to Jerusalem, but the trip by retail CEOs to Capitol Hill is a crusade because this industry is already suffering big time. You had 8 CEOs ahead of Best Buy, Target, Gap, AutoZone. Normally, they'd all be fighting each other, but they joined together to go and try and persuade Congress not to vote in this border adjustment tax. They met with Kevin Brady and they met with Paul Ryan. And the big news now is that they're going to meet tomorrow morning with President Trump. And we could expect something major to come out of there. He's already said that this tax is too complicated. Of course, apparel would be hit the hardest. That's why the Dow Jones Industrial Retailers were up big time today, more than 1%. Now, of course, this is just one of the many issues that are speed bumps for this rally. But big money interests on both sides of the debate, because you've got exporters like GE and Boeing. They're okay with an import tax. But you also have some smaller names out there that, to me, represent Americana. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. And, of course, today we also heard from Janet Yellen, who momentarily stalled the rally. But later on, the market took off big time. Here to help me hash it all out, we've got Liz Peek. Liz, a lot going on.
There's a lot going on.
Just a lot going on. So, first, Janet Yellen. Because in my mind, earlier, late last week, you had 2 members of the Fed speak, 2 voting members, and they essentially said maybe 1 rate hike this year. So the same day that Donald Trump brought the rally 3 weeks, waiting on a new tax announcement, I think they bought us a year, and maybe she confirmed it today.
I think, honestly, they have no idea what they're going to do, Charles. We've been teased by Janet Yellen for, 2, 3 years about how we're going to have a steady bunch of rate increases, better to have that than a sudden surge, et cetera. Remember that around the world, no one else is tightening at this point. There is no sign of inflation. And, in fact, despite the market optimism, and I think for good cause there's optimism about the economy accelerating, we really haven't seen much of that. In fact, it looks like first quarter retail sales are going to be okay, ho-hum, nothing very exciting. We've seen a bit of a drop down in terms of hourly wages going up. So, I think it's a very tough case for her to make that we really have to see strong enforcement.
But businesses are starting to build up inventories. They're getting very excited.
Yeah.
The only missing component, to your point, are wages. And you keep thinking, any day now, any day now. I mean, because all the anecdotal evidence showed that they maybe 6 months ago should have started to rally up. And it's a bifurcated workforce. There are people who are making more money and others who just can't command a raise. So the market, the naysayers, the curmudgeons, they're throwing shade on this thing. It's been 45 days, 46 days since the S&P has had a correction of more than 1%. Some people see that as a negative, but why can't it be a positive?
Well, but S&P earnings were very strong in the fourth quarter, so we have good earnings to back up the market rise. I think that the stock market is looking at the policies coming out of Washington, which have translated, by the way, into very definable items like small business optimism, which surged, an unprecedented surge in December and was up again in the first quarter. So it isn't just complete make-believe that what Trump is doing connects the dots to a good stock market and also to an accelerating economy. It's just a little early. And what we're seeing is a lot of talk, for example, about tax reform. You were talking about that earlier. What has developed, not so surprisingly, is tax reform is complicated. Everyone's ox gets gored when you start talking about it.
Should they take it in bits and pieces? Like, for instance, tomorrow.
Good question.
Where do you stand with respect to this border adjustment tax? I don't like it. I had Kevin Brady on. He explained it eloquently, but I think it's a tax on the lower income folks out there. I think it's a tax on a lot of jobs that, as we're trying to create jobs, I think we'd be losing a lot of jobs.
Well, and to the fact that it might impact retail, that's a disaster because retail is a disaster. That industry is struggling mightily for all kinds of reasons, including, by the way, the minimum wage push going on across the country to have wages higher. I'm not a big fan of the border tax. I think the issue is that if, in fact, you lower corporate tax rates so significantly as Trump has been talking about, you have to make up the revenue somewhere. And this is a revenue adjustment that is also in keeping with his determination.
But there's always that gray area about, greater velocity of money, people spending more money.
No, I mean,
look. It's a supply-side thing. I mean, it worked kind of okay for Ronald Reagan, but we'll see.
Yes.
I am going to predict that tomorrow, I'm going to make a prediction that tomorrow President Trump comes out on the side of retailers and he rejects the border adjustment tax. I think that takes
If he doesn't like
higher.
it, it won't go through.
Good.